We recently asked a couple hundred of you emerging biotech leaders about your go-to sources of information when you face tough professional challenges. Your top response wasn't webinars, it wasn't scientific journals, it wasn't trade shows, it wasn't even consultants. Far and away, you said you most often turn to your peers for trusted insight. Enabling a community of peers is what the Business of Biotech podcast is all about. It's also what our new Business of Biotech newsletter is all about. Peer-driven content, no strings attached, delivered to your inbox once a month. Go to bioprocessonline.com/BOB to subscribe. The Business of Biotech is produced by Bioprocess Online, part of the Life Science Connect community, with support from Cytiva. Cytiva also demonstrates its commitment to the leaders of new and emerging biopharma at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. Check that out. Dr. Francois Rieger is chairman and CEO at BioSenic, a late-stage biopharma company working on therapies for the control of innate immunity and tissue repair. The company was formed as a result of Bone Therapeutics' recent acquisition of Medsenic, which Regier founded in 2011. But before he was an astute biotech businessman, Dr. Regier built a storied career in research and academia. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech, and Dr. Regier is here with me now to share on the acquisition and its outcomes. But first, Dr. Regier, I'm going to ask you for some help pronouncing a few things along the way as we get to know you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, and I'm happy to be there. And go ahead.
Yeah. So I want, like I said, I want our audience to get the chance to get to know you, but I'm terrible with French pronunciation. So I'm going to run through some of your academic and research experience. And we'll make it fun. When you see me pause and give you a nod, I'm going to ask you to fill in the blank. Okay. So Dr. Regier.
I may do the same for you. Huh?
I'll be more than happy. Dr. Regier studied physics at the Joseph Fourier University. I probably could have got that one.
Yeah,
correct.
You could have got that one because mathematics is full of transformé of Fourier. It's a very basic type of mathematic means of in many different applications.
Okay, that's a good trick. Although I was as bad in math as probably I would have been in French. The Joseph Fourier University in Grenoble.
Yes,
Grenoble, and you earned your Ph.D. in neurology. This one I'm not even going to try. You earned your Ph.D. in neurology at the the
École Normale Supérieure in Paris.
Perfect. Yeah. You worked with Nobel Prize winner Jacques Monod. Did I get that one right?
To start my career in biology. That's good.
That was at the Pasteur Institute?
That was the Pasteur Institute in Paris.
You were a fellow in research at the French National Center for Scientific Research?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. I think, there's more. So you were an assistant professor of neuropathology at Harvard University. When I say there's more, I mean there's more I need help pronouncing. You led a joint team of research from the National Institute of Health and Medical Research and the French National Center for Scientific Research unit at the, starts with a P.
Hospital.
The Pitié-Salpêtrière?
Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital.
Oh,
that's
so
the
beautiful.
biggest one in Europe.
So beautiful when it comes out of your mouth.
Pitié-Salpêtrière.
Perfect. You were a senior associate researcher in the laboratory of Nobel Prize winner Gerald Edelman at Rockefeller University. You created in Geneva, a binational scientific interest group on the broader theme of aging and longevity. You've authored or co-authored more than 175 international publications in the field of life sciences and neurosciences. And there's a whole lot more. So for our audience, there's a whole lot more on Dr. Regier. You can Google him for that. But it's safe to say we've ascertained that your academic and research career is quite storied. It's long, it's distinguished. So it begs the question, why, when and why you decided that you were going to transition into industry?
at the end of my career in the academic field. And what happened is that we had in France very interesting results on a specific product, compound, molecule, which seemed to be extremely useful for probably getting to some treatments, useful treatment in autoimmune diseases, in the autoimmune diseases field. As I was working hard on multiple sclerosis at that time, I felt that it was probably very appropriate that somebody took this task. And what happened is that the patents were a little bit already old, a few years, and this was supposed to be a very difficult task. And I thought it was a good challenge for me, and I started that way.
So it's a transition that it sounds natural when you say it, but oftentimes that transition from academia to industry can feel a little bit unnatural, a little bit clunky. At the same time, I'm sure that your academic and research career has instructed or informed your leadership in industry. So talk a little bit about that. How have you leaned into your academic leadership to sort of inform the way that you lead emerging and clinical stage biopharma?
The answer is very simple. I think that basic science is absolutely extremely important for giving good grounds to any type of practical or industrial development. And this basic science had worked 40 years on it to try to get the minimum information. And my training there was very, very important to be sometimes pretty firm and have the necessary assurance to proceed into big projects which were involving a lot of money and a lot of energy, with the basic fact that the science behind was good or was as good as possible when starting. So that is the main point.
It's just a side question here on that note. When you started working in earnest in the industry, obviously as a leader in the industry, you have to have some, comprehension or awareness of your competitive set. Other people who are working on similar indications or working in similar modalities on similar indications. Did you notice or have you noticed a problem in terms of the growth of biopharma companies and whether or not they generally, obviously I don't want you to name names, but generally, do you see a problem in the industry around companies that perhaps aren't as rooted in that, long-term study and research that you brought to the table?
I have seen, I have seen some facets that I didn't like too much in terms of, generally called the strategy of the firms, which were decided at the highest level by people trying to get together investment return with some opportunities in science and medicine, since that's my field, and making guesses which were not always totally enlightened by the fact behind, but they sometimes they didn't care too much and or enough, and that was going to decisions which were probably involving too many people, too many financial efforts for for not so good expectations to start with. I mean that grounds for making big decisions with big money were not enough, and I've seen that very, very often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you founded Medsenic, as I stated in 2011, correct? 2011.
Yeah.
and just recently over the summer, I want to jump into the creation of BioSenic, the result of Bone Therapeutics' acquisition of Medsenic, which you led this past summer. So, give us sort of the origin story there. How did that acquisition come to pass, and when did the discussion sort of begin?
Yeah, it's a good question. As a matter of fact, with Medsenic, which is still a private company, we had not the burden of working like a listed company with a lot of attention to the public and to be very careful in saying or trying to find new paths or new ways of solving problems. And but at a certain time, we had, of course, the problem of the funds and fundraising. And we did well for several years with fundraising from venture capitalists and people trying to find out what we were doing, what was the hope to success. And the hope to success was clear for several years. It's clear now still. We had to have success in clinical trials. And the product should be performant for trying to treat people and certain types of indications. But at a certain point, venture capitalists were not really there or enough to try to go further. Since when you start with a phase 2 trial, and specifically with the phase 3 type trial, one is observational, the other is confirmatory with many patients generally, you need a lot of money. And it was clear these three last years that it was not really possible for venture capitals to get into our adventure and bring the money that we needed. So one solution that which occurs to everybody else is to go on a market and to try to get public attention. And so for 2 years, we went through ideas. We started with IPOs, possibilities, but that takes time and money, and we didn't have the right money for that. Then the question was merging with another company and maybe finding an empty shell, you see. That was the thought for a few months. And going through this idea, we went through a few, very few opportunities. One of them was Bone Therapeutics, which was not empty at all, but which was easy for us to discuss with them and find, maybe you will have other questions later, but to find ways to synergize our projects and possibilities, capacities, and minds. And that's what happens after a few months of discussion when we got meeting the people from Bone Therapeutics.
Yeah. You read my mind. I mean, I certainly do have follow-up questions to that because without having context, which is what we're talking, that's why we're talking, to sort of gain that context. But without that context, if you're just looking at the transaction on paper, the marriage on paper, the merger of Medsenic and Bone Therapeutics feels like or looks like sort of an unlikely combination. Medsenic's heritage is in that development and optimization of arsenic salt formulations for therapeutic application in inflammatory conditions. Bone Therapeutics obviously had made a name for itself with lead assets in allogeneic cell therapies for complicated bone fractures, that is. So again, like it's not, I guess, obvious or inherent what that.
No, but it's again simple. If you think of autoimmune diseases, we are dealing with systemic degrading diseases. Several organs are concerned and they get damaged to the point that they become fibrotic or they become unfunctional partially or even totally. So that means degradation. And at that point, what we were doing since years and we are still doing is trying to stop this type of degradation of these chronic diseases. degradation occurs on several years generally, not immediately. And so trying to stop the process is very good. Trying to stop it even before it starts is even better. You see, that was the way we were going for years. And when you cannot master this degradation processes of several types, several organs, you have to deal with organ repair. And organ repair may be a good thing to activate when you are a little bit late into the chronic stage or the chronic development of the disease. And we found that in bone therapeutics. In bone therapeutics, they had cells which are coming from the bone marrow and which are undifferentiated. And there are two properties. One is even three properties. One is to be able to not be seen easily by any immune system. They have what we call an immune privilege. So you can put them in a place in an organism, in the body, and they will not be detected very easily, and they are not going to be rejected very easily. So that's one point. The second point is that, very interestingly, these cells have anti-inflammatory properties. And inflammation is one of the main characteristic of an autoimmune process. And so anti-inflammatory properties means that they are able to release anti-inflammatory factors or cytokines. And that was exactly what we wanted to do, to stop pro-inflammatory cytokines and maybe activate, if it is possible, to activate the release of anti-inflammatory cytokines or factors. And they are probably absolutely able to do this task. And more than that, when you use these cells, which are not totally differentiated, they are able in situ, in the place where you put them, to become cells of a certain lineage. And bone therapeutics had shown by many examples and with a very good stock of patents and intellectual property very, very clear that these cells were for bones and joints able to differentiate in osteocytes and chondrocytes, you see? And they could do much more. So there is a full path of development here, which is not now, but much later in the next years. And it gives some very good promise for, I would say, for cell therapy in itself.
Yeah.
So all that put together, you have many types of possibility of application. The difficulty is to find what we do now and not to do everything at the same time, which is a guarantee of doing nothing. So, but as a matter of fact, the putting together Medsenic and Bone Therapeutics, giving BioSenic, is, at my opinion, a very good thing. And several months after having succeeded in the reverse merger, it's something which is clearly a very good option for the next 2-3 years.
Yeah. Well, your description there, your explanation or rationale kind of speaks to the point you were talking about earlier when I asked you about your observations around companies that are established and funded on science that isn't as sound. It sounds to me like even though on paper, therapeutic applications in inflammation and bone fracture therapeutics, even though on paper at face value, those seem like very different things, the fundamental science behind what Medsenic and Bone were doing meshed. There was synergy.
Exactly. That's exactly that.
Very good.
You were asking me about the politics of big firms. We bumped many times into very big biopharma's representatives VC, vice president, president, chief of development, business development, scientific, even scientists into these places. And what they were saying very often is that they were on the same tracks than in terms of indications, for example, lupus, or for example, systemic sclerosis, or diabetes, or multiple sclerosis, but they had all their project going on. They were putting a lot of money into trying certain types of products, of molecules, and they couldn't think of anything else. They were totally tightened by their project and not able to easily think that other things could come. And for them, it would have been very easy to buy us for a very small amount of money, probably 1/100th of what they were spending on one molecule, which 2 years later was going to be abandoned because the trials were not good. But they were totally tightened to their project, and with no view of trying to differentiate or to adapt or to go elsewhere when the opportunity was there. So that has been my feeling for years in this field.
Yeah. And that sort of general, I guess, sentiment that's out there in the industry, or I guess mindset, can certainly, as you noted, when you were on the fundraising trail and looking at VCs, it was a challenging environment. It's even more challenging environment today, I think, than it was a couple of years ago. So did when you came to the point where the merger was the answer and that was underway, did you continue to face any skepticism from analysts or shareholders, board members, even employees of each company? Like what was there? Yeah.
At that point, we were not with analysts. They were just, we were with people trying to find out how valuable we were on each side. And they were counting the projects, the stage of the project, and making assumptions and putting figures behind that,
Yeah.
But nobody was really trying to get into the depths of the motivation for this type of merger. And so we had no skepticism expressed by anybody at that time.
Yeah.
And I would say it's still true right now. And when people in this general field, biopharmaceutical industry, are trying to think, I think you get very fast to the basic science. And that's where I feel a little bit easy, because, when people say that you have 250 cytokines, why did you choose, or why do you speak of these 2 or 3 cytokines? They cannot answer really, or they have a very, very clear thinking. It's because it is acting in such a step of such disease, which is absolutely generally too early to be stated that way. And we don't know right now, I think, a disease which is absolutely linked to one cytokine by itself, except genetic defects.
Yeah. And I certainly want to spend some time getting into the sort of science behind the therapeutics that you're working on. But I want to focus for a minute on sort of the mechanics of the acquisition, I guess, itself. And I think it's timely. As I said, given the state of capital markets for the past 12 to 18 months, there's some optimism now. I think there's, with so many small biotechs being devalued, I think there's optimism that there'll be a lot of M&A activity in this coming year, where there's good science and good buys to be made. And for a lot of folks, especially a lot of folks who listen to this podcast, it may be a first blush with a first attempt at a merger on either side, or acquisition, either as the buyer or the seller. So I'm going to ask you to just sort of take us behind the scenes of the mechanics of the deal, its terms, its execution. What a fellow small biopharma CEO might expect from the experience?
I can give you a few steps that I now see after having been through this whole process. And you should know, today I learned that the FSMA, which is a regulator in Belgium, they say if it is fine that we get onto the market, and we have to present a prospectus for that, as you certainly know. This prospectus has been nearly accepted today, and it should be okay next week. So we started this merger something like last June, and it took 7 months to get to the processes to finished in terms of getting really listed as a company onto a market, onto the Euronext. So I can give you a few steps that we have lived through through these 7 months, which I believe 7 months is probably rather rapid, but not exceptionally rapid.
I was going to say, yeah. I mean, yeah. It sounds like a pretty aggressive timeline.
Yeah, but we worked very hard and no vacation. So the first thing,
you Europeans, you take these long vacations. Did you skip that last year?
Yeah, I skipped, and a few people with me had maybe 2-3 days, but that's it.
That's it.
And, we couldn't spare any time in any type of good time elsewhere.
When you're striving to excel in a new arena, the best guides are the ones already doing it well. The Business of Biotech brings those voices forward to help new and emerging biopharmas turn their innovations, like mRNA and cell and gene therapies, into clinical realities. Tune in and subscribe for insights on hiring, regulatory, and other need-to-know topics for biopharma leaders. The podcast is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emergingbiotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emergingbiotech.
So I just listed that on a piece of paper. If you want, I just have a look on that, because
yes,
by mind like that, it's a little bit. It would be artificial. So we had to contact Bone Therapeutics board's active members, people responsible for Bone Therapeutics, through a deal maker, somebody who put us in connection with these people, because we didn't know them personally, anyone. So we had to make a contact, and so we had to go then to designate, since it appeared to be a possibility. We had to designate on each side the top management necessary to discuss and to find out if for clinical, for financial, for a certain number of topics, if we could get along, and especially if on the other side there was a big problem immediately appearing, and that was very, very important to evaluate that. And it took us maybe 2-3 months and a few visits on each side to learn and to get to know each other. The personal contact was absolutely necessary at that point. So we did that, and after we decided that there was the necessary intervention of independent analyst evaluators of what we had, and that was legal, of course, the structure of the companies on each side. It was structural, who we had as active personnel, employees able to perform the work that we said we were doing or wanted to do or we had done before. Scientists also, who did an audit on the ideas and on the scientific committees on each side to find out what were strengths and weaknesses. And every time it took maybe 3-4 weeks for each type of study in details, and we had a clear report on something like 50 to 100 pages on what was going on these different topics. Mm-hmm. And at that point, we had the financial evaluation made by an independent body outside telling us what could be our real valuation, because on each side, we had an idea of what was the value of the company. It was easier for Bone Therapeutics because a listed company, you have actions and you have a price which comes out, and you have to modulate that by what happened, by what they want to do, and so on. But it's a little bit easier than for us, private company, where everything was not public, and we had to develop and to show what we were doing, what were the chances to success for 1 project, 2 projects, with 3 projects. So they had to look through the 3 projects, and they had to give figures to say that we were evaluated at a certain level. And I'm not going. I can tell you that the valuation, it's very public now. We went to the fact that they were valued at 10 millions, and we were valued at 80 millions. Mm-hmm. Which gives you an idea of what was the results of the reverse merger, which was anticipated at that point, which was that we were going to, even being bought by Bone Therapeutics, we were getting into Bone Therapeutics, and we were getting the majority of the shares, of the possible shares. And as a matter of fact, we decided to go through a kind of something a little bit different than just to put together everything, 100% of Medsenic into Bone Therapeutics. We decided to put 51% of Medsenic into Bone Therapeutics, which gave us, anyways, the major part of the shares at that point. Coming out of this transaction. And we decided that the 49% were going to stay on the side for 2 years, or 2 or 3 years. And if everything was going fine, everything would go back, would go directly into BioSenic. So we would not leave 49% of Medsenic forever outside.
Yeah.
Okay, so at that point, we had a strategic committee, a board on our side. It was easy to get yes to go ahead. And on the other side, they had to make general assemblies. And it took nearly 2 months for the general assembly. There are maybe more than 3,000 shareholders in Bone Therapeutics. So there are a few who are very, very important to give their advice, their opinion, their yes. And we got to this general assembly of Bone Therapeutics in last October. So it was something like 4 or 5 months after the beginning of the discussions. Mm-hmm. And that was yes. So at that point, we became BioSenic, 51% of Medsenic into Bone Therapeutics to become the whole thing BioSenic. Mm-hmm. Okay? And I became the same day CEO and president of the board of BioSenic, with 6 other members, among them 2 coming from the Bone Therapeutics origin. Mm-hmm. Yep. And we started at that point, that was beginning of November, to develop all the details for the prospectus to be accepted by the market authorities. And it took us 3 full months of very, very heavy work, terrible work. Don't go to Belgium. They are too they are too, they get onto every detail. So we had to go back to everything we did for 5 years before to justify every number, every figures, every type of decision, and the same for Bone Therapeutics. And we finally ended this whole process, I tell you, this week.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. Again, aggressive. And I appreciate that sort of step-by-step walkthrough. As I said, I think that's very instructive. And yeah, congratulations. It's a quick
Thank
time
you.
frame. And
thank you.
And
if I had known, I wouldn't have been doing this type of thing.
Well, yeah, it's got to feel pretty. It's got to feel good on the backside of it, though. Although, that leads to my next, I guess, series of questions. As you stated, you did not understate the amount of work that went into making this happen. So a lot of work in a short amount of time. Once the companies are officially brought together, BioSenic is an entity. There's still a lot of work to be done, I would assume, around integrating the two companies, not just the platforms, not just the indications that you're working on or the pipeline, but the people, the culture, the technologies. So let's start with the softer part of that discussion. Yeah. Bringing Medsenic and Bone Therapeutics together, you're meshing two even maybe nuanced, but two different cultures and two different workforces together. And I know it's early days in that process, but give me a little bit of insight into what your strategy is there and how you're managing that part of the combination.
The answer is again rather simple. It goes to the strong and interesting particularities, characteristic of on each side. On our side, I would say Medsenic, private company with no ties and nothing to do than just to be successful and to be very, very quick on different things. We had learned to find that basic science was very important. New results from others had to be taken into account very, very quickly, and we should adapt very, very fast. And so it was clear that at the point we were, that was to start a phase 3 clinical trial on graft versus host disease chronic form, because that's our main lead indication on the side of Medsenic. This required more organization and structures, and a very good chief medical officer, a very good chief scientific officer, very good people for regulatory affairs, not only external as we used to practice, but inside, in order to understand very well the things and be very careful of what we were going to do in the clinical, in the applied clinical field. And so that we didn't have enough, or we didn't have at all. And we found that into the listed company Bone Therapeutics, which once 2-3 years ago were more than 100 people. They had 3 different clinical trials going on. They had put together all the regulatory, the medical, the laboratory, also manufacturing at home. So they knew all types of things to do in order to go from the inception of the project and the manipulation of the technical and clinical product, and get everything ready for later to be in a commercial type of prepared setting, you see. So all these structures was really available, not everything, but a lot of things that we needed. So we were very happy to find this culture that we didn't have. And so On one side, we brought, and I brought the basic science culture and the fact that we should be realistic in originality, in new aspects, and not just to do what 10, 20 other people were doing, or firms. And they had a very, very strong habit of processes in getting everything done one step after another step.
Mm-hmm.
And that we got that for the last months. It was getting together, and it was interesting to compare experiences and to show and to demonstrate what we had to add to. On one side, we didn't have, and on the other side, I found what I told you for big biopharma. It was true for Bone Therapeutics. They were so systematic that they were forgetting the essential of the originality inside.
Yeah.
So they were perfect in terms of dealing with the press release and making the market learning of what they were doing 1 hour after 1 hour. But at the same time, they were losing the perspective sometimes of trying to be original and just wondering if they were doing the right thing, but the right basic thing.
Yeah.
So the two cultures go together, and we have a lot of way still to go, but in terms of how we can implement and complement and synergize, it's very clear that it's a good operation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think something that's probably an afterthought oftentimes are systems and technologies. You mentioned how good Bone Therapeutics was with processes and sort of the mechanistic part of market presentation and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I assume that they were also pretty mature on the sort of technologies and systems continuum, given their progress on the clinical front. So, but I think that's often an afterthought. Like when you bring two companies together, and you want to unify them quickly. Everything from office systems to the platforms and technologies that you're using in the laboratory. There are going to be some winners, some losers, maybe some hybrid sort of activity. But what was your experience there, and what do you anticipate moving forward in terms of, meshing and I guess sort of synergizing the systems that make each company go?
Yeah, to say the truth, we are not going to synergize existing mechanisms or offices or group of people, because most of them left. You see, but the knowledge of what they have to do or what we have to do is still there. And we kept a few people very good and very dedicated to succeed in what we were all together doing. For the people who couldn't bear to be outside the very, very strict and, big pharma type of work, which was generally one person was doing a very small part of the work, complemented to another one, and everybody couldn't do the work that the others was doing. And the fact is that when you have 10 people like that and you are missing 2 of them, the whole thing is not working at all. So what we found is that it was better to get one of these people out of 10, having understood what was going on, maybe having a little bit more interest in doing something wider than they were supposed to do before. But at the same time, it's more interesting for the everyday work for certain type of people. And we try to keep these people, and it was not so difficult to keep them because they decided to stay, because that was interesting for them. The others, they didn't feel that much interested, and they found other jobs of the same type that they were doing.
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
And of course, now I should add that we are faced with next month in trying to implement and find some other people for very, very specific task that we need to have good people to perform.
Yeah, I mean, you're more than welcome to share some detail. Maybe perhaps this the airing of this episode will spark some interest in folks who are likely candidates. So tell us a little bit about. I'll probably bounce around here a little bit. Usually, we kind of wrap up the conversation with pipeline and clinical updates. But I'm while we're talking about the merger and the bringing together of these two entities, I want to make sure that we spend some time talking about how that affects the forward-looking sort of pipeline and candidate development that BioSenic might be looking at. So just give us some flavor for what the influence of these two different companies might mean in terms of development, therapeutic development moving down the road. And then we can talk about your existing clinical progress, in a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's nearly the same. We have two lead projects, by the way. One coming from Medsenic, the other coming from Bone Therapeutics. From Medsenic, it's very clear that we need to succeed because we had a successful phase 2 trial on graft versus host disease, a chronic form. And we need to transform that into a real success on the bed of the patient by doing a full phase 3 convincing type of trial, which will take us probably at least 2 years before getting to some type of possible intermediary analysis. And so this project is very important. We keep it, and Bone Therapeutics is very happy. The people and what come from Bone Therapeutics very happy to see that we are on the right tracks for that. On the other side, with the second lead project is, of course, coming from Bone Therapeutics in terms of the phase 2B going on right now with dozens of patients already recruited, tested, followed right now. And we expect something like an intermediary analysis or sort of intermediary analysis in the next few months to find out if we are on the right tracks with the use of the mesenchymal stem cells, the allob cells that they are carrying since years and which are very well characterized and which are very well protected by for the intellectual property side. So that would be nice to succeed in these two types of projects. And this is, of course, not excluding what we had in our what you call pipeline. We had two pipelines. On the side of Medsenic, we had a good phase 2A type of clinical trial, a success a few years ago on lupus, on SLE, systemic lupus erythematosus. So we would like very much to go on with that, but we need a partner, a big biopharma partner for that. So that's one thing which is evident. It's impossible for big diseases, important diseases like that, to succeed without being stronger than we are. So, yeah. And we have the basic results, the preclinical and the first clinical results are okay. So why not? But not alone. You see?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there is another disease which has absolutely no medication, which is called systemic sclerosis. It's something which is it's a systemic disease. It's a very bad disease. It's chronic like the others. Takes years, but you are getting worse and worse, and the patients are in a very, very bad condition rather soon. And and even the corticosteroids which are used for most of the autoimmune diseases are not useful at all. You get a little bit of success with a very low doses of corticosteroids, but if you increase, you aggravate the disease. So you cannot go that way. And you need you need a product which would be efficient. And I think that for preclinical reasons, we have this type of thing with our arsenic formulation.
Mm-hmm.
So that is something which could also be developed and which is part of our pipeline. And on the other side, on the bone therapeutics, ex-bone therapeutics side, the cell repair side, what we would like to do is probably to go further and elsewhere than the tibial fractures.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other types of fractures or other types of bone repair that we could think of. Even the cartilage would be a very good objective. And there were already studies started with the bone therapeutic side, which was a type of protection against osteoarthritis. And we believe that osteoarthritis is partly inflammatory. So
Mm-hmm.
it's exactly one disease which is shared by both sides. We think that by putting together something with our arsenic and what they had in the house, in the bone therapeutics, we may end up by something a little bit original and probably, we hope, efficient. So
Yeah.
you see, there is a lot of work to do. It's not going to be done in 2 weeks. It's
Right.
probably a question of getting more and more into the 2 next years. And of course, as usual, we need money for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that begs the question. We're running short on time here, Dr. Regier. So I'm just going to wrap up with a few sort of wrap up questions. And you just made a beautiful segue into one of them. You said, it's going to take some time and we need money for that.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you a 2-part question. One, looking back at the point you are now in the acquisition, the bringing of the companies together, looking back on the progress you've made. 2-part question. What are you most proud of or happy with in terms of your progress? And then the second part of the question is the flip side of that. What needs to be done most imminently next? Okay.
To say the truth, since 3 months, we don't stop from the morning to the night to work on the explanation of what we had done, what we want to do for the public, which is called the prospectus. And it's now a volume which is nearly 200 or 300 pages with a lot of verifications, controls, and everything. I would say I didn't think that I would write such a dictionary. I would, you see, with perspectives and with the statements on what we are able really to do. So that is something very, I didn't expect that, but this is very important for me right now.
Yeah, well, that probably, you probably drew from your academic and research chops when you worked on that project. It was like it's like writing your thesis all over again.
Yeah, it's like writing 10 theses.
Yeah.
And now, what your question about what should remain to be done? I think we want to be successful in the ALOB 2B clinical trial this year, in terms of results that we are going to try to understand this year. And we need to start and to get the first patient for our chronic GVHD project in the middle of this year. And if we are able to do that, I will be very proud also to say that we are starting this clinical trial.
Yeah, excellent. Well, like I said, we're running short on time. Are there questions? Are there any questions that pop into your head that I should have asked you that I didn't? Did I miss anything major that you'd like to kind of squeeze in before we wrap things up here?
But maybe you could have asked me if somebody else should have been in my position and me doing other things elsewhere.
Well, It sounds to me like you're doing an excellent job. And I'm super thankful for the transparency. I'm very thankful that you came on the show and that you were as transparent as you were about the process, some of the challenges you faced. And it sounds like you're doing a terrific job. So I don't know what's next for Dr. Regier, but it sounds like you're gonna be leading BioSenic for a little while longer anyway.
Thank you, and thank you for your questions and good spirit in discussing with me.
For sure, yeah. Well, we'll be paying attention to BioSenic and hopefully have you on again sometime for an update on progress.
Okay, with pleasure.
All right.
Bye-bye, Matt.
So that's BioSenic CEO, Dr. Francois Regier. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We are produced by Bioprocess Online in partnership with Cytiva, which demonstrates its support for new and emerging biopharma companies at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. Check that out. Check us out at bioprocessonline.com/BOB, where you can sign up for our new newsletter. And if you like listening in on conversations like this one, subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review. And as always, thanks for listening.